Ever since the race of men first awoke in the far eastern lands of Arda, Morgoth schemed and planned to corrupt them, to bring about their fall from grace. Some men, such as the Edain, managed to escape his influence by migrating to the western lands of Beleriand, while those that remained behind were easily deceived by Morgoth's lies, and they viewed him as a god that was worthy of their worship. In their eyes, the greatest way to show reverence for Morgoth was to destroy all of his enemies, especially those men that had betrayed their god by escaping to the west. Now the Easterlings were divided into many different houses and factions, and their appearance was said to be shorter and broader than the Edain, with dark hair, eyes, and a sallow complexion. We know that their culture was influenced by the dwarves, and that the Easterlings favored this race over the elves. It's very likely that they interacted with some dwarven clans that lived in the nearby lands, for the harsh Easterling language was said to be quite similar to dwarven speech. Now even among the various Easterling tribes, whispers were spreading about the wondrous land of Beleriand. Stories of its riches, its waters, and even its wars awakened a desire within the Easterlings to experience this land for themselves, and over the years they started to migrate to Beleriand. Morgoth would actually twist this migration to suit his purpose, for many of the Easterlings were loyal servants of his, and he could use them to infiltrate the armies of his enemies. Unfortunately, the Free People fell right into Morgoth's trap, as they couldn't afford to turn aside new allies. They were already far too weak and outnumbered by Morgoth's forces, and so when the Easterlings appeared in their lands, the Free People saw this as a great chance to strengthen their forces by forming an alliance with these men. To seal this allegiance, the two greatest chieftains of the Easterlings, called Bor and Ulfang, swore an oath to the sons of Feanor, with Bor's faction following Maitros and Maglor, while Ulfang's people followed Carantir. Even though they were now allies, the Edain and Easterlings would rarely mix together, and their people were often quite cold to each other. I imagine that this might be due to the differences in culture, or perhaps because of their past conflicts when both of these factions used to live in the east. Now in the year 468 of the First Age, Maitros felt that the time was right to launch an attack on Morgoth's fortress, and he called upon all of the Free People to unite under one banner. As they readied for war, the Easterlings trained their soldiers, and they also summoned more of their people out from the east to bolster their forces. And soon, the day of battle finally arrived. Little could they imagine the horrors they would soon have to face. Orcs, Balrogs, and even a new evil that had only been seen once before, Glaurung, the father of dragons, now fully grown and more powerful than ever. It is quite a testament to the valor of the Free People that they still had a chance of victory despite facing these terrible foes, though unfortunately they would be defeated from within. For while Bor and his people had renounced Morgoth and were loyal to their cause, Ulfang's faction of Easterlings planned to betray their allies, and during the battle they turned their blades upon the army of Maitros, attacking their rear. They had also set up some of their kin to hide in the nearby mountains, and upon their signal they ambushed the Free People from the east. This meant that Maidros' army was suddenly fighting upon 3 fronts instead of one, and it must have been extremely confusing and demoralizing to see their allies betray them. We're not sure if Ulfang managed to survive this battle, or if he even took part in it, though we do know that all 3 of his sons, called Uldor, Ulfast, and Ulwart, were slain. Uldor was killed by Maglor in single combat, while Ulfast and Ulwart fought against the sons of Bor, called Borlad, Borlak, and Bortand, in a skirmish that would claim all of their lives. This battle would end in a devastating defeat for the Free People, and it became known as the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. The different choices of the Easterling factions would also go down in history. Uldor was labelled as Uldor the Accursed for the part he played in this betrayal, while Bor earned the title of Bor the Faithful, for his people had truly turned away from Morgoth and they were loyal to their new allies. It is also worth mentioning that this betrayal would have a lasting effect on the relationship between elves and men, for we're told that great was the triumph of Morgoth, and his design was accomplished in a manner after his own heart. For men took the lives of men and betrayed the Eldar, and fear and hatred were aroused among those that should have been united against him. From that day, the hearts of the elves were estranged from men, save only those of the three houses of the Edain. Now, ironically, the Easterlings that betrayed the free people would also be betrayed by Morgoth, for even though he promised them the rich lands of Beleriand in return for their service, he broke his word, and he ordered them to occupy the land of Hithlum instead, which belonged to the people of Hador, one of the three houses of the Edain. This betrayal changed the way the Easterlings viewed Morgoth. They would no longer love him as a benevolent god, but instead they were now driven to serve him out of fear and their hatred for the elves. In their new land of Hithlum, the Easterlings unleashed chaos and destruction, imposing their dominion upon the people of Hador. They stole all their lands and possessions, oppressed their people, enslaved their children, and forced many women into marriage against their will. Those who were deemed too weak or old to serve the Easterlings were put to death or driven out to starve in the wild. It was clear that the Easterlings despised the Edain, and under their rule, the land became so terrible that even orcs could travel through it with very little resistance, as they searched for elves that were hiding in the nearby mountains. Despite their depravity, the Easterlings were too afraid to lay their hands on the household of Morwen, the wife of Hurin, who had once ruled this land before he was captured by Morgoth. Rumors had spread among the Easterlings that Morwen was a powerful witch who could use terrifying elven magic, and as much as the Easterlings hated the elves, they feared them even more. Now these Easterlings were led by a chieftain called Broda, who used to be a man of very little importance before he was sent to Hithlum. However, during his time in this land, he rose to power, and he acquired great wealth, and now he was determined to create a powerful dynasty that would last for many years to come. Using his slaves, he built a great hall in this land, and he forcefully took a woman as his wife called Iren, who happened to be a blood relative of Hurin. Ironically, even though the Easterlings considered themselves to be superior to the Edain, they were envious of their women, for they regarded them as being more beautiful and elegant than those of their own people. Even though Iren wasn't Broda's slave, he would sometimes treat her cruelly, and he would even go so far as to beat her whenever he discovered that she was helping Morwen by sending food and supplies. As the years passed by, Morwen noticed that the Easterling spies were drawing ever closer to her lands, and she was scared that her son Turin would soon be in danger. She knew that he couldn't escape the Easterlings forever, and so she sent him to Doriath to be fostered by King Thingol. Turin would eventually return to his home in Dorlomin 23 years later, and he barely recognized the land. What was once beautiful was now bleak and bare, and the few people that remained were mean-spirited, and they spoke in the harsh tongue of the Easterlings, for the language of his own people had become that of enemies and slaves. Daring to speak it openly could easily end up in a beating, or possibly even death, for the Easterlings would suspect them of being a spy. Turin had little choice but to march straight into the Great Hall of Broda, as he was seeking out Iren for information about his family's whereabouts. Unfortunately, he would discover that his mother was no longer living in this land, and in his rage he slew Broda and many of the Easterlings within this hall. Some of the servants and slaves actually rose up to help Turin, though unfortunately a few of the Easterlings managed to escape, and they would inform their people about this rebellion. There was no doubt to the people of Hador that they would have to face the Easterlings' anger and revenge, and so those that were strong enough chose to escape with Turin to the southern mountains of Dorlomin. The Easterlings tried to pursue them using hunting dogs, though they weren't able to catch them in time. Apart from the story of Turin, the Easterlings would also play a significant part in the life of his cousin, Tuor, whose father was slain in the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. Tuor was born in the land of Hithlum that very year, in the eastern wilds of Mithrim, and he was fostered by the Grey Elves that lived in the nearby mountains. They had taken refuge in the caves of Androth, and over the years this land became more dangerous, so much so that the elves planned to escape in secret to the distant south, to the havens of Sirion. Unfortunately, while they were trying to escape, a band of Easterlings and orcs fell upon them, and many of the elves were slain, while others scattered into the night. Tuor refused to flee, and for long he stood, slaying many of his enemies, before he was finally overwhelmed and captured by the Easterlings. He was only 16 years old at that time, and the Easterlings brought him before their chieftain, Lorgan, who was well aware of Tuor's heritage. Out of cruelty, Lorgan was determined to break Tuor by treating him horribly, in order to desecrate the pride and heritage of the House of Hador. Even the barbaric women of the Easterlings would treat him like a beast. But since Tuor was young, skillful and strong, they made sure that he was well fed, so that he could keep serving them. Tuor would have to bear this enslavement for 3 long years, and over this time he grew to full manhood, becoming taller and faster than his Easterling masters. One day, while he was working in the woods, an opportunity would finally present itself for Tuor to escape, and he turned his axe upon his guards and he slew them. The Easterlings tried to hunt him down, though their plan was flawed, for Tuor had actually befriended their hounds while he was in captivity, and so they wouldn't help in his capture. For the next 4 years, Tuor lived as an outlaw in the caves of Androth, seizing any chance to hunt and slay Easterlings that crossed his path. He was so deadly that Lorgan set a great price upon his head, yet not even the promise of riches could convince the Easterlings to approach his hiding place, for they were terrified of these caves and the elven people that had once lived there. In the final battle of the First Age, known as the War of Wrath, the Easterlings stood by Morgoth and they fought against the Free People. They could never have imagined that their master would be defeated, and the few Easterlings that survived this war fled to the east, where many of their people still wandered, living a wild and lawless life. These people had avoided the summons of Morgoth and the Valar, and the Easterlings became their kings and lords, spreading their evil influence over this land like a shadow of fear. For a time, the Valar abandoned these men that had refused their summons, and who now followed the servants of Morgoth. And unfortunately, they would have to endure many hardships and sorrows, as the remaining creatures and evils of Morgoth, such as demons, dragons, misshapen beasts and orcs, would infringe upon their lands and trouble them. Anyway guys, this wraps up today's video and I hope you enjoyed it. Initially, I was planning to cover the entire history of the Easterlings, though I had around 40 pages of notes and the script was coming way too long, so I decided to divide it into 2 videos, with this one being the Easterlings in the First Age, while the other video will cover the rest of their history. In the meantime, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Do you think that the Easterlings were evil? How unlucky were they to fall under Morgoth's corruption? What do you think happened to Bor's Easterling faction? Did they survive throughout the rest of the ages, and how come we don't see them in the War of the Ring? I imagine they would have still been following the Free People, or did they turn evil and return to the rest of their kinspeople in the East? So yeah, there's a lot of cool things to discuss on this topic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. As always, I'd love to give a quick shout out to all my patrons that choose to support this channel. Your help and support make this channel possible, and I really appreciate it. Particularly my Valar tier patrons, Michelangelo and T. Gorman, and also my Wizard tier patrons, James Tudgel, Andrew Bomer, Mike Feeney, Roland Mervold, Zumi, and DudeSir47. If you like the work that we do on this channel and want to support us, check out our Patreon page in the video description, where you can unlock some really cool perks. You can also support us by checking out our store, and by following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and joining our Discord server. All of these links can be found in the video description. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.